The sun was bright enough to bleach the rows of white chairs, the kind that look elegant until you're the one walking past them with every head turning. I held the wedding gift against my chest, the ribbon cutting into my palm. My pale blue dress felt suddenly wrong, too hopeful, too visible. I spotted an open seat in the second row. Safe, respectful, not the front. I was almost there when Marissa stepped into my path like she'd been rehearsing this moment. Her face was painted heavier than usual, lipstick sharp as if meant to cut. "What are you doing here?" The words weren't curious, they were a verdict. I blinked, tried to smile. "I'm here for the wedding." "You weren't supposed to come." Flat, practiced. My throat went dry. "Jason's my son." She folded her arms. "We revoked your invitation last night. Didn't you check your email?" The world tilted. Who checks their email the night before their only child's wedding? Behind her, Jason stood near the groomsmen, half in shadow. His eyes found mine for half a second, then slipped away. No signal, no word, not even a raised hand. That silence cut deeper than anything Marissa could say. "You told your own mother not to come?" The words burst out louder than I intended. Faces turned. A hush rippled. Her mother glided forward, hand on her daughter's arm, cream-colored gown just shy of bridal. "It's best you leave now before we have to make this bigger," she said smoothly. My legs trembled. I swallowed, my tongue tasting metal. "Fine." One word, enough to let me walk away without breaking. I passed rows of faces, some pitying, most blank. Jason's best friend looked at his shoes. 2 guests I'd known since high school shifted uncomfortably. I became the spectacle, the sad act no one wanted to claim. By the time I reached the edge of the garden, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the gift. Vendors pushed carts along the gravel path, oblivious. And then I heard it. Marissa's father, on the phone, voice clipped. "As long as she doesn't talk, we're in the clear." The words struck like a hammer. My breath caught. I didn't know yet what he meant, but I knew this humiliation wasn't just about appearances. It was about silence. Mine. Have you ever been told you didn't matter in the very place you should have belonged most? I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, gift still in my lap, staring at the patterned carpet until the shapes blurred. My pale blue sleeves felt stiff against my arms. The sound of Marissa's father's words, "As long as she doesn't talk, we're in the clear," echoed in my head like a bell I couldn't unring. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought the shame of being told to leave my son's wedding would flatten me, but instead, a strange stillness settled in. It wasn't sadness, it was something sharper, clarity. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling back to the past year, all the little ways I'd been pushed to the sidelines. At the time, I'd told myself it was about taste or tradition. But in the silence of that hotel room, I started lining them up like dominoes, seeing a pattern I had ignored. First was the engagement dinner. I'd shown up with flowers, smiling, eager. Marissa accepted them politely and set them aside, never once introducing me to her extended family. Later, when the photos went online, I noticed I wasn't in any of them. Cropped out, or simply not asked to join. At the time, I told myself it wasn't deliberate. People get distracted. Then came the dress fitting. Marissa told me it was just for bridesmaids and immediate family. I bit my tongue, reminding myself not to be difficult. But inside, I felt the sting of being classified as something less than a mother. When the wedding website went live, I looked for my name. Instead, I saw glowing paragraphs about Marissa's parents, how supportive they'd been, how much they'd invested in making the day perfect. My name was nowhere. I mentioned it to Jason, hoping he'd notice. He just sighed and said, "Don't take it personally. You know how she gets about appearances." Appearances. That word clung to me now, as though my entire existence threatened their carefully curated image. I remembered offering to bring childhood photos for the memory table. Marissa smiled too sweetly and said, "We're doing minimalism, cleaner aesthetic." Translation: my son's life before her didn't fit the Instagram theme. I even offered to help with invitations. She waved it off. "We're using a design service, complicated if you're not used to it," as if I'd never seen a website before. Each time, I swallowed the hurt, told myself to respect boundaries. But lying in that stiff hotel bed, I realized I hadn't been respecting them. I'd been erasing myself to keep the peace. The next morning, still in my gown, I drove home with no music on, no radio, just the hum of the highway. At every red light, another memory surfaced. The look Marissa gave my Honda Civic, calling it cute, vintage. The way her father shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. The pity smiles from Jason's friends as I walked out of the garden. Back at my kitchen table, I pulled out my old laptop. The screen lit the room in cold blue. My fingers hovered, unsure where to begin. But the phrase I'd overheard, "As long as she doesn't talk," demanded an answer. Talk about what? I remembered something from months earlier. Jason and Marissa had gone on a trip, asked me to bring in their mail. One envelope had been half open. Inside, a bank statement. Jason's name alongside another I didn't recognize, Clarence McDowell. The account balance had been more than $100,000. At the time, I thought it was a mistake. When I asked Jason later, he brushed it off with a flat no. No joint accounts, no explanation. Now, with that sentence echoing, it no longer felt like a mistake. I typed the name into a search bar. At first, nothing. Obituaries, a car dealership, scraps of nothing. Then I added fraud. The first hit was a court filing from 2 years earlier, a civil case tied to identity manipulation and property flipping. The name buried in a list of shell companies. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about me being excluded because I wasn't glamorous enough for their photos. They were keeping me out because I'd seen something I wasn't meant to. They thought I'd forgotten. They were wrong. I leaned back, staring at the chipped rim of my blue teacup on the counter. That cup had been with me since Jason was a boy, the handle cracked but holding. Suddenly, it felt like a symbol, fragile, overlooked, but still intact. I started pulling up old emails, texts, voicemails, anything that might tell a story I hadn't been paying attention to. Marissa had been careful. No fights in writing, no sharp words preserved. Just silences, vague, polite refusals, endless boundaries. But one thing caught me. The day after Jason proposed, he texted me a photo of the ring. I replied, "She looks happy. I'm proud of you." He answered, "I'm glad you're on board." On board, like a business deal, not a marriage. That phrasing gnawed at me. I dug deeper. Memories sharpened in hindsight. The time Marissa came to my house right after the engagement. I'd offered tea. She refused, but when I came back from the kitchen, she was standing by my bookshelf, thumbing through one of my tax folders. She smiled when I caught her. "You're so organized." At the time, I laughed it off. Now I wondered if she'd been looking for something. I pushed my laptop aside, heart racing. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a thread pulling me forward whether I wanted it or not. That afternoon, I called Danielle, an old friend from the bank. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd gone on to become a compliance officer. I asked her to lunch. When we met the next day, I slid the partial screenshot of the account across the table. She studied it, her expression shifting. "Karen, this is structured to look legitimate, but it's not. That second name, listed as a silent cosigner, that's a red flag." "What kind of setup?" I asked. Shells, fake business fronts, sometimes identity swaps. They use people who won't ask questions. Her words confirmed what I'd feared. Jason wasn't stupid, but he was gullible, eager to impress. He might have walked into something deeper than he realized. I drove home gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. In my living room, I pulled out a manila folder, labeled it in neat letters. Just in case. I slid the screenshot inside, then opened my laptop again. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing for clarity. If they wanted me gone because I paid attention, then I would pay attention all the way through. That night, I printed timelines, cross-referenced dates, and filled pages with notes. The glow of the printer light filled the dark kitchen. The hum of the dishwasher underscored every click of the mouse, every shuffle of paper. I had thought I was just a mother erased from a wedding, but as the folder grew heavier in my hands, I realized I was becoming something else, the one person they couldn't erase. And that, I knew, was the mistake they'd regret most. I left the diner with Danielle's words pounding in my ears. Silent cosigner. Red flag. The afternoon light hit my windshield too bright, the world looking both ordinary and tilted. I gripped the wheel until my hands ached. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a full minute, staring at my front porch, wondering if walking inside meant admitting that nothing about my son's life was simple anymore. Inside, I dropped my bag on the table and stared at the folder I'd labeled, just in case. It looked too thin, flimsy against the weight of what I was starting to suspect. I opened Jason's old box of belongings, the one he'd left when he moved in with Marissa. At the bottom, under tangled cords and faded textbooks, I found an external hard drive. My pulse quickened. I plugged it in. Folders bloomed across the screen. College essays, vacation photos, taxes, and then one called Invoices 2022. I clicked. Page after page of PDFs scrolled past, most of them small amounts for design work. But two files caught me. CBM Consulting Group, $500. Equinox Logistics, $37,000. I typed both names into search bars. Nothing. No addresses, no websites, just hollow shells pretending to be real. I printed them out, each sheet warm in my hands. The hum of the printer filled the room like a drumbeat. The dishwasher kicked on behind me, a low rumble under the click of my mouse. My house had never sounded so loud, every noise punctuating the fact that I was digging deeper than a mother should have to. I told myself I was only gathering, not accusing, not confronting, just collecting threads. But by the end of the night, the folder bulged. My handwriting filled pages of a spiral notebook, dates, amounts, names that kept circling back to the same shadow. Clarence McDowell. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of Jason as a little boy bringing me wildflowers, and then the dream twisted. His face blurred into the shadow of a man who looked away while his bride erased me in public. I woke with my heart pounding. The next morning, I made a choice. If they thought I was invisible, I would prove them wrong. I drove to Jason's apartment while I knew he'd be at work. I still had a spare key. My stomach churned, but my hands were steady. I told myself I wasn't stealing. I just needed to see. His office was too clean. No clutter, no cables, like a staged photograph. But the trash can told a different story. At the top, a crumpled envelope from Baxter & Lane, a law firm. I smoothed it out with shaking hands. A letter confirmed a name change. Clarissa McDowell to Marissa Lane, 8 months ago, just after the engagement. I read it 3 times. It felt like ice water down my back. Marissa wasn't just Marissa. She'd shed another name like a snake's skin. Tactical, not romantic. I took a photo, returned the envelope exactly as I found it. Then I opened his filing cabinet. Inside were NDAs, 3 of them, signed by Jason and strangers. Janine, Michael, someone who only used initials. Vague language, nothing specific, just promises of silence. By the time I got home, my hands smelled of paper and ink. I spread everything across the kitchen table, the chipped blue teacup pushed to the side. The evidence formed a collage of deceit. It was more than I wanted to know, but less than I needed to prove. I stared at Jason's face in an old photo on the fridge. College graduation, cap tilted, eyes bright. How had that boy become the man who let his wife humiliate me without flinching? Was he trapped, or was he willing? The question lodged in my throat like a stone. That night, I called Lisa, another old colleague from the bank. She'd become a financial investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told her what I'd found, she didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was being dramatic. She just said, "Send me everything." I scanned documents until midnight, screenshots, invoices, the photo of Marissa's name change, even the NDAs. I uploaded them all into a drive I labeled Family Trust and sent it over. My hands trembled when I hit send. The next morning, Lisa called back. Her voice was taut. "Karen, you're not imagining this. These are the kinds of documents we see in real operations, front companies, laundering, identity manipulation. This isn't small." Her words should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like the moment before a storm when the air stills. She told me not to confront them, not yet. Protect the evidence. Keep backups. Wait. Waiting had never felt heavier. 2 nights later, Jason called. His voice was clipped, irritated. "Mom, Marissa said you've been snooping around our place. What's going on?" My chest tightened. I had a choice. Pretend, deflect, stay in the role of the agreeable mother, or step into the risk of truth. I thought of Danielle's warning, Lisa's caution, but the weight of years of silence pressed on me. Respectful shouldn't mean invisible. So I drew a line. "Jason," I said, my voice steady, "I know about the joint account. I know about the name change. I know there's something you're not telling me, and if you think I'll stay quiet to make things easier for you, you're wrong." Silence hummed on the other end. For a moment, I heard only his breathing. Then, "You don't understand." "Then explain it," I snapped. "Because right now, it looks like you stood by while she erased me from your life, and you're tied to things that could ruin you." His tone hardened. "You're making a scene out of nothing. You always do this." The words hit like knives, always. As though the years of double shifts, of saving for his tux, of showing up quietly hadn't counted. As though my only identity was trouble. "I won't be erased, Jason," I said, every syllable sharp. "Not from your wedding, not from your life, not from the truth." The line went dead. I sat at the table, the silence pressing in, tears threatening but not falling. That was the price of my first boundary. His rejection, his anger, his refusal to see me as anything but inconvenient. But under the ache, I felt something stronger, resolve. I gathered the folder, slid in the newest notes, and closed it with a firm snap. The sound echoed in the kitchen, as final as a judge's gavel. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking for permission to exist in my son's story. I was claiming my place, even if it cost me him. They wanted me quiet, but I had already spoken, and the price, however sharp, was one I was willing to pay. The days after that phone call with Jason stretched like gray sheets of rain. I went to work at the tax prep firm, but numbers blurred, receipts swam on the screen. I walked home with my shoulders hunched, afraid of running into neighbors who might ask how the wedding went. The question sat like a stone in my throat. At night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the manila folder. The weight of it had changed. It no longer felt like armor. It felt like a ticking clock, daring me to open it, reminding me that each page carried the power to shatter what little remained between me and my son. My pale blue dress still hung on the closet door, wrinkled now, smelling faintly of perfume and humiliation. I couldn't bring myself to put it away. The silence from Jason was complete. No calls, no texts. Even when I sent a short message, "I'm here if you want to talk," the dots never appeared. It was like shouting into a canyon. The echo came back empty. That was when the whispers started. A cousin texted, "Heard something happened at the wedding. You okay?" A coworker asked if I'd been sick. People sensed the absence, the way gossip always fills a vacuum. I replied with polite evasions, but inside I was breaking. My own family had seen me escorted out of my son's wedding like I was an uninvited guest, and Jason had let it happen. The shame was heavier than anger. I'd done everything right, bent myself into silence for years, and still I was cast as the problem. I wanted to scream, to drive to his apartment and pound on the door until he answered. Instead, I sat alone in my living room, the hum of the refrigerator my only companion. One evening, exhaustion pulled me onto the couch. I woke hours later to the sound of my phone buzzing on the table. Lisa's name lit the screen. My heart jumped. I answered with a shaky, "Hello?" Her voice was steady, clipped, but warm. "Karen, I need you to listen. What you have isn't just suspicious. It's part of a larger pattern." I ran the names through someone I trust. Clarence McDowell shows up in older investigations, immigration rackets, stolen identities. Never enough to charge, but too many coincidences to ignore. I pressed the phone tighter. "So I'm not crazy." "No," she said firmly. "You're not crazy. But you are in danger of being isolated. That's how these people operate. They make you doubt yourself until you give up." Her words broke something open. I told her about Jason's call, the accusation that I always made a scene. My voice cracked. "Lisa, I don't even recognize my own son." He stood there and let her erase me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Karen, you can't carry this alone. Not anymore. You need allies, and you need to protect yourself. I can set up a meeting with someone federal, but I need you steady. Can you do that?" I stared at the chipped blue teacup on the counter, its crack still holding. My hands trembled, but I whispered, "Yes." After we hung up, I sat in the dark. For the first time in weeks, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just hot rivers running down my cheeks while my body shook with the release of years of swallowed hurt. I thought of Jason as a boy, his tiny hand gripping mine as we crossed busy streets. His head bent over homework while I worked night shifts. And now the silence on the other end of the line, the deliberate turning away. I almost gave up that night, almost packed the folder into the back of a closet, told myself to let him go, to stop digging. The weight of isolation was that crushing. But Lisa's words anchored me. "You're not crazy, you need allies." The next morning, she called again. "I want you to make 3 copies of everything. 1 to keep safe, 1 to give to someone you trust, and 1 to mail to yourself sealed. That way no one can say you faked it." Her certainty steadied me. I spent the day scanning, printing, organizing. The click of the printer became a rhythm, each page sliding out like a drumbeat against despair. I bought a fireproof lockbox at the hardware store. I handed 1 copy to Danielle over coffee, her hand gripping mine tighter than words could manage. The third I sealed in an envelope, signed and dated across the flap, and dropped into the post office chute. The small rituals of protection gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd lost: a sense of control. Still, the nights were hard. Alone in my house, I'd imagined Jason's voice, Wonder if he was sitting in some apartment telling himself his mother was the enemy. I wondered if Marissa whispered in his ear that cutting me out was strength, not cruelty. Each time, I almost broke. Then the phone rang again. Lisa. "There's someone I trust," she said. "Private office, no names. They'll look at what you have. If it's as serious as I think, they'll take it further. But you have to be prepared. If this becomes formal, your name could surface. Are you ready for that?" My throat tightened, but I heard myself say, yes, because the alternative, silence, erasure, was worse than exposure. In the days leading up to the meeting, the pressure mounted. My sister called, asking why Jason hadn't sent thank you notes yet. I deflected, heart hammering. At work, a colleague joked about weddings being stressful, and I laughed too loudly, too brittle. Every small talk conversation felt like a test I was failing. One night, the weight nearly crushed me. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open, documents spread like a deck of cursed cards. I whispered to the empty room. What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin him? My voice cracked on the word ruin. That was when I saw Lisa's message pop up. "You're not alone in this." Simple words, but they hit like a lifeline. I closed the folder, inhaled deeply, and felt a flicker of fire return. The morning of the meeting, I dressed in simple clothes, nothing to draw attention. I placed the folder and flash drive in my bag, checked the locks on my house twice, then drove across town. The streets looked the same, kids waiting for buses, a man walking his dog. But I felt different. I was no longer a mother begging for a seat at a wedding. I was a woman carrying truth that others wanted buried. When I arrived, the office was plain, gray walls, no sign on the door. Inside, a man sat across a table, expression unreadable. He didn't waste time with small talk. He just said, "Let's see what you've got." As he leafed through the documents, highlighting sections, grunting at familiar patterns, I realized I'd crossed a threshold. I wasn't on the outside anymore, doubting myself in silence. I was part of something larger, and there was no going back. Walking out of that building, folder lighter in my hands, I felt the shift. The isolation that had almost crushed me was gone. In its place, a fragile but steady flame, resolve. For weeks, I had been erased, ignored, shamed into silence. But thanks to Lisa's belief, I now stood upright. Not invincible, not unscarred, but standing. And I knew this was only the beginning. The silence after that meeting pressed on me like a heavy blanket. I had handed the folder over, walked out of that gray office with my back straighter than it had been in years. But at home, the waiting began. Days ticked by without visible change. I went to work, processed tax forms, made small talk with clients, but every break I checked my phone. Nothing. No word from Jason. No word from Marissa. No word from the man who had nodded over my documents and promised nothing but to take it from here. It felt like living inside a paused breath. A week later, the first ripple reached me. Lisa called early in the morning, her voice clipped, measured. "Something's moving," she said. "Accounts are being frozen. Don't be surprised if you get calls. Just remember, hold your line." That afternoon the call came, not from an investigator, but from Jason. His voice was frayed, ragged with panic. "What the hell did you do? Who did you talk to? Marissa's accounts are locked, her parents are being questioned, and I'm getting calls from people I don't even know asking about my finances." I sat at my kitchen table, phone warm against my ear, heart steady in a way that surprised me. "Did you know she changed her name, Jason?" The silence on his end was absolute. Not a thoughtful pause, but a canyon of 5 full seconds, long enough for me to feel my breath echoing inside it. Finally, he muttered, "It's complicated." That single phrase told me everything. My throat burned, but my words sharpened. "You knew." He tried to defend himself, tripping over excuses, but my mind was clear. "You stood there," I said, voice cracking, but resolute. and let her throw me out like I was nothing. You knew what was happening, and you let it happen. He said something I'll never forget. I didn't think it would matter. The line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, hands trembling, staring at the chipped blue teacup sitting on the counter. It looked fragile, useless, but it was still holding together. Just like me. Within days, the fallout exploded into the open. Marissa's company, a curated brand of glossy images and curated partnerships, announced a temporary pause. Her social media presence evaporated. Her father's dental practice issued a press release about staff restructuring, though everyone knew the word was cover for something darker. I hadn't said a word to anyone. All I had done was pay attention, refused to bury what I saw. The truth had done the rest. Then the whispers began to swirl. A friend in finance called quietly, saying her firm had been asked about shell companies linked to invoices under Jason's name. A groomsman from the wedding messaged me for the first time in years. People are saying Marissa used a stolen ID to get her visa. Is that true? I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I simply replied, she made choices, and now those choices are catching up. The second call from Jason came late at night. His voice was different this time, broken, wet with sobs. They're going to arrest her. Mom, I didn't know how far it went. I swear I didn't. Please, can you fix this? The plea sliced me open, dragged me back to nights when he was small, climbing into my lap after nightmares. For a heartbeat, I wanted to reach through the line and hold him, but then his words replayed. Can you fix this? He still thought I existed to clean up his wreckage, to be the safety net he had already shredded. I steadied my breath. Jason, you told me I didn't matter. And now the only reason any of this is being stopped is because I paid attention. Not because you did the right thing, because I refused to stay silent. He tried to interrupt, his voice frantic, but I pressed on. You made your choice. You let her erase me. You let her erase your own mother. He didn't answer, just breathing, heavy and uneven. Then silence. Then the click of a line gone dead. I waited for guilt to crush me, for the familiar ache of maternal instinct to demand I take him back, fix everything. But it never came. What settled instead was clarity. I wasn't destroying him. He had done that himself. All I had done was refuse to disappear. In the weeks that followed, headlines spread like wildfire. Financial institutions issued cautious statements about tightening fraud prevention. Marissa's name appeared again and again, tied to aliases and shell companies. Jason's name surfaced at the edges, a shadow associated, linked, under scrutiny. I was never mentioned. Lisa had kept her word. I was invisible only to the public, not to the people who mattered. At work, whispers floated through the office. A colleague leaned over one afternoon. Did you hear about that big fraud case? Crazy stuff. I smiled thinly, kept typing numbers into the computer, heart steady. For the first time in months, I wasn't drowning under shame. But I missed him. God, I missed him. Not the man who hung up on me, but the boy who once picked dandelions from the yard and called them gifts. That boy was gone, and in his place stood someone I couldn't recognize, someone who had decided my place in his life was expendable. At night, I wrote letters to him that I never mailed. In one I wrote, I don't know if you're a victim or a participant, but I know you erased me. And now I'm the one person who saw through it all. The ink blurred with the tears I finally allowed to fall. Lisa's calls came sparingly. Formal proceedings are underway, she said once. Stay quiet, stay steady. I clung to her words like a rope. The public collapse of their facade was steady, merciless. Marissa's brand fell apart. The father who had once looked at me like a nuisance lost his practice to an internal review. Friends who had laughed at the wedding began to distance themselves. The house of cards toppled in slow motion, each piece collapsing into the next. And through it all, I held my line. The hardest part was realizing that I didn't want revenge. I didn't care if Marissa spent nights staring at ceilings in fear. I didn't care if Jason felt the sting of headlines. What I cared about was this. I had stopped pretending that silence was noble, pretending that erasure was respect, pretending that being unseen was the same as being loved. I remembered the moment at the wedding when every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting for me to make a scene. I hadn't. I had swallowed my words, walked out quietly. But now, in a way none of them expected, I had spoken louder than I ever could with tears or shouting. The storm was not over. The investigation was still moving, questions still unfolding. But the balance had shifted. I was no longer the invisible mother with a seat revoked. I was the one person whose refusal to disappear had lit the path for the truth to walk through. And though the cost was staggering, the fracture of my relationship with Jason, the loneliness of nights filled with unanswered memories, I felt taller than I had in years. They had wanted me erased. Instead, I had become the line they couldn't cross. And the storm, I knew, still had more to bring. Months slipped by after the storm broke. The headlines quieted, the investigations folded inward, and my phone stopped buzzing with whispers. The silence was different now, not suffocating, but empty, like a room after the party ends. I went back to work part-time at the tax firm, filled my mornings with long walks, and tried not to listen for Jason's voice in every unknown number that called. He never did. One afternoon, while folding laundry, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young woman on my porch, late 20s, a child clinging shyly to her leg. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but her posture held something steady. "Are you Karen?" she asked. "Yes." She shifted the child forward. "My name is Sophia. I used to be married to your son." The words stunned me. For a heartbeat, I thought I misheard. But then I looked at the boy. His eyes, Jason's eyes, wide and searching. I stepped outside, voice shaking. "You were married to Jason?" She nodded, calm, not bitter. 5 years, overseas. He left when he said he had a job in the States, promised he'd send for us. Then he stopped answering. I only found out he remarried through social media. I traced his name back to you. I stared at the boy, heart aching. "And this is your grandson," she said softly. The air left my lungs. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My throat burned with questions, but none would form. Finally, I whispered, "Why come to me?" "Because he deserves to know where he comes from," she said. "I'm not here for money. I'm not here for revenge. I just want someone in his life who won't disappear." Her words pierced me. I nodded slowly. "Come in." We sat in my kitchen, the same table where I had once spread out invoices and bank statements like a puzzle of betrayal. Now it held 2 cups of tea and a plate of crackers. The boy swung his legs under the chair, eyes darting around. I found myself smiling at him, unbidden. Sophia showed me documents, marriage certificates, photos, records. Each one a stone laid in a path I hadn't known existed. Jason had carried secrets heavier than I imagined. Not just financial, not just fraudulent, but human ones, lives abandoned, promises broken. I should have felt rage. Instead, what settled in me was sorrow, and then something else, resolve. Over the weeks that followed, Sophia and the boy returned. I bought a car seat, cleared out the spare room, painted the walls pale yellow. I learned what snacks he liked, how he pronounced grandma as Nana, how he laughed with his whole body. I never once spoke ill of Jason in front of him. He was too young to carry his father's mistakes. I only said, "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense," He accepted it with the simplicity only children have. Sophia and I grew close, not out of pity, but recognition. Two women who had both been left behind, who had both been told, in different ways, that we didn't matter. We built something steady out of the rubble, a quiet friendship, a shared purpose. Evenings grew softer. The boy colored at the table while Sophia and I cooked. The house filled with ordinary sounds, spoons against bowls, cartoons humming from the living room, the click of the porch light turning on. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for Jason. I had stopped pretending. One night, after tucking the boy into bed, I sat on the porch swing and let the summer air wash over me. I thought of the pale blue dress still hanging in my closet, a relic of humiliation. I thought of Marissa's sharp smile, Jason's silence, the folder of evidence that had once consumed me. And then I thought of the boy upstairs, breathing evenly in sleep, safe under my roof. The balance had shifted. They had tried to erase me, to push me out of the story. Instead, I had written a new chapter, one they couldn't touch. I didn't get justice in a courtroom. I didn't get a grand apology. But I got something better. I got to stand in truth, to stop pretending, to hold a child who looked at me as if I were the safest place in the world. Sometimes victory doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like peace. And sometimes peace is enough. So no, I'm not looking back. I have my life. I have a grandson who calls me Nana. I have the strength that comes from refusing to disappear. What they tried to bury became the soil where something new could grow. And if you've ever been told you don't matter in your own family, know this. Silence is not strength. Attention is. Share your story. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this journey touched you, subscribe to Roots and Secrets so you won't miss the next.